Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge, and welcome to Eldridge and Company. I've been very interested in talking about gangs. It seems to me, I don't know, maybe I'm making this up, but so often when the police have problems, they always say they're going to look at gangs. They think the gangs are doing, now, the latest comment I saw was gangs doing guns. Anyway, I'm so lucky today to have two visitors who really know what gangs are, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Alex Vitale is a professor of sociology at Brooklyn College, and he's also the coordinator of the Policing and Justice Project. And Darlene Murray is a member of that collaborative, and she knows very well because she's the community representative and also a representative of a family that's had experience with this, what we're going to talk about. So I'd like to welcome both of you. Alex, do you want to start us? Do I have to call you professor?
No, please.
Okay. Would you please start us? And I know, maybe give us a little, how did you start this center?
Sure.
So not a center. Project.
It's a project. Yeah, CUNY has rules about what can be called what. So we have to move up to being called a center. But we have been around for several years now, and we started in the wake of a series of very high profile, very large scale gang conspiracy cases that started happening about 6-8 years ago and ramped up a little bit after that under the term Operation Crew Cut. And there was a lot of concern among academics, legal advocates, community members that there was a tremendous overreach and that the city was defining things in new ways that was encouraging this escalation of policing tactics. So that basically, we've seen, homicides and shootings fall dramatically over the last 25 years. And what happened was the city began to define the remaining number of them as all being gang related. Even though there's very little evidence to support this, that before they did this, they said maybe 2% or 3% of shootings were gang related, but they dramatically expanded the gang unit. They created this new gang database. And now all of a sudden, 10, 15, 20% of things are being called gang related. And they've created all these new resources. And the result has been mass incarceration. They're just driving huge numbers of young people into the criminal justice system, relying primarily on conspiracy cases in which they don't have to prove that each individual person did a specific thing. They just have to show that they were connected to this alleged criminal enterprise. And even those connections are very thin.
I read the report that the project has put out. It's called Gang Takedowns in the Blasio Era, the Dangers of Precision Policing. And I was horrified by it. I have to tell you, I've been around for a long time. I worked for John Lindsay. That was my first government job. And John Lindsay and I worked the year after the Kerner Commission report. I mean, we know what the problems are, I guess, and we're not going to have anything until we get a peaceful revolution, and you're spearheading part of it by talking about changing the function of the police department.
Well, and the Lindsay administration, right, avoided this labeling of problems as gang related. And he attempted a kind of social inclusion strategy and de-escalation strategy by both putting youth workers out on the streets to work with kids, to soften the sense of a hardened gang identity, to try to get kids involved in pro-social activities. And at the same time, he brought young people into city government, creating a youth board where young people could come and talk about the problems that they and their families and communities were experiencing, and to feel a sense of connection rather than one of alienation, which we find just hardens gang identities and encourages the kind of problematic behavior that we then turn over to the police to manage.
Usually we see the failure because we have these raids continuously. We have problems continuously. So you know that we're doing something wrong. Darlene, are you a mother of somebody who was caught up in one of these raids?
Yes, hi. I am the mother of Donnell Murray. My son was added on to a RICO conspiracy gang case. They had he was added on with 16 other individuals, and it wasn't a gang takedown. They brought him in. But my son was at that time was 38-year-old male, father of a son who is 8 years old, and he was indicted in January of 2017 in this federal gang conspiracy case. My son actually turned himself in voluntarily, but he was jailed without the possibility of getting to post bail at the government's request. And that was troublesome right there in itself, because bail should be an opportunity for you to demonstrate that, you know, you're not going to flee, you know, and they didn't even consider that. What they saw was that once they put the label on you as gang affiliated, that you automatically are guilty of committing violent crimes. And so the odds of getting that bail, if they was to even have set a bail, would have probably been somewhere in the $1 million range, which families can't even support that to even get out. So that was very concerning. The case was initially brought under the U.S. Attorney pre-Barra, and my son had spent over 2 years in federal custody in humane conditions. And in 2019, he decided he wants to take his case to trial to reserve his innocence and prove his case so he can come home to his family. So he went to trial with 2 other co-defendants in the case. And Donnell was convicted, and he included in aid of racketeering for a 2012 shooting in the Bronx. My son was sentenced to almost 20 years in prison for crimes that he did not commit. And there was so many issues with this case at trial. This case went on for approximately about 16 weeks.
Was it a jury trial with a jury?
It was a jury, not of his peers. So these were jury selects way out of, you know, wherever they get them from. And strangely, that the case was one of the things that the attorney who was representing my son said he didn't even understand how this case even got to federal. So he really didn't know the real history as to why my son is on this here. But to kind of make a long story short, my son had a history of harassment and retaliation with the NYPD for several years. So to me, it was not so surprising, because I knew that they were out to get him, because my son had was harassed by the NYPD. He had cases that he won in court, and then it resulted into civil litigation. So he was really like a high-profile person to go after, get him whatever you can. So this was their retaliation to cooperate with the NYPD along with the prosecutors. And so it's easy that they pulled Murray into this here and figured if they could use Murray as the bait in some ways because of his association, not no involvement in terms of anything illegal that he was doing, but just the mere association of knowing the person, of saying we were childhood friends or we grew up in the same neighborhood. They used that with so many of them to try to build their cases. And this is their tactics, what they use.
Did they offer him a plea deal?
Oh, of course, as soon as he got in there, they were right there. He said, you know, he couldn't even get his feet, you know, foot in the door, and they were shoving his plea offer in his face and trying to, you know, entice him and others. So that's how they do it, and just slap this on you and say, hey, if you don't take this, you're going to face this amount of time.
Right. And so the problem is, if you're innocent and you go to trial, then you even get a higher, longer sentence.
You get penalized, you get punished for the fact that you decided to go to trial.
Is he still in prison?
Yeah, he's actually, he's in. He's waiting to appeal his case now, so he's in the process of doing that.
You know, part of the problem with these RICO charges, right, is that they were designed to go after complex, well-funded criminal enterprises. So the idea was is that if there was a mob boss who was ordering hits and then using their money to create elaborate legal defenses, you know, that the government needed tools to go after that. But when folks have looked carefully at these kinds of prosecutions using RICO, what we find is that most of these young people have at best a loose association. In the Bronx 120 case, Babe Howell at CUNY Law School found that half the young people in the end, the state didn't even allege they were in a gang. And 90% of them were eligible for a public defender. I mean, these young people didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. This was not a criminal enterprise, but they're using the fact that young people in these communities, and these communities we're talking about public housing developments and very poor communities of color, they are highly networked. That's just the reality of living in those neighborhoods. And they're using the fact that they all know each other to say that they're all linked together in these criminal enterprises, so that when one person does something terrible, shoots someone, they can now arrest the entire community of young people and say they're all guilty of that shooting, even though they never even alleged that 99% of them held a gun or did anything violent.
So the list now is how big is it? We don't even know that, do we?
So the criminal database, the numbers keep shifting, in part because of the pressure that we've been putting on them. We got them to purge thousands of juveniles off the list, though many still remain. But we believe there may be tens of thousands, and we've been told that 99% of them are non-white.
And that follows all the other patterns that we have. But how does someone get on that into that database?
So there are a number of different pathways according to the NYPD. And I should just say that there's almost a total lack of transparency here. And for the last 3 years, we've been pushing hard to get the NYPD Inspector General's office to do a full review of this. Similar reviews in Chicago, in different places in California, have found widespread abuses, discriminatory treatment, the kinds of retaliation that Ms. Murray spoke of. And so we need a full accounting of this. A school safety agent can say, oh, a student seems to have some unexplained money and is wearing a purple handkerchief, put them on the gang database. You can be caught, you know, on camera outside a bodega wearing black. And you once got arrested for marijuana with someone else who they think is put them on the database. So there are many, many ways to go on there. There's no notification. There's no right to appeal. People don't know they're on this database, and yet it can have major consequences for their lives.
We don't even know if there's a protocol. I mean, a public protocol that you know what this part.
There is a protocol, and we talk about it some in the report. The problem is it's incredibly vague. Mm-hmm. So it can be things like frequenting a known gang location. But gang locations are things like a basketball court or a bodega. And it can be wearing known gang colors. But then the list of gang colors is red, blue, black, orange, green,
rainbow,
purple, pink, right? Every color can be a gang color. So it just leaves this huge swath of discretion to the police about deciding who goes on this list.
And to the school guards. If somebody comes in and isn't, I don't know what, but they exhibit something or something.
So those school guards work for the NYPD.
Yeah.
And they are integrated into this gang policing matrix. And we know for a fact that they're empowered to put kids into this system to get the ball rolling on having them classified as gang members. This is the
pipeline, right? From school to prison that we talk about.
Yeah,
I've done a lot of work with people in prison, but not before. And this defies any common sense, right? The housing authority, what do? Do they have any programs any effective programs in their housing developments?
No, they don't. They're horribly underfunded, as we all know. They can't keep the lights on. They can't keep the heat running. And throughout New York City, there are public housing developments with recreation centers that are sitting empty because they have no money for staff or programming. What they do is they turn over surveillance systems to the NYPD to conduct these investigations. So they're cooperating with criminalization, but providing no resources or services for young people.
When you have a case, when there's a big takedown, that's the word, right?
Yeah.
What are the governmental agencies that are involved in it?
So it's been different in different cases. In some of the Manhattan cases, the Manhattan DA and the NYPD have been the primary agents involved, but in other cases, like in the Bronx, we see the federal government play a major role. So ICE, Homeland Security, DEA, marshals, these kinds of agencies can be involved. So in one of these raids, you had militarized federal police that looked very much like what we saw in Portland in recent months.
Darlene, in prison, how many does he have friends from the neighborhood in prison?
Yeah, there's friends from the neighborhood and in prison.
And is he, I mean, I can't imagine how he can accept this or what he's doing. Is he involved in courses and stuff that's going to help him?
Well, right now with the COVID, there's very limitation for anything. So they, a lot of things has been taken from them. Mm-hmm. And pretty much they moved him. Place is a little bit better, but of course being incarcerated, nothing's really that great. Right. You don't have the luxuries of what you have from home. So he's able to get some fresh air, because the other place that they had them locked in for pretty much 24/7 through the COVID, and there's no windows, just in a room, just like two people like that. And he was just telling me how filthy it was, and they barely got the food. It just was horrible. So
what a wasteless expenditure, isn't it? Alex, this is really the heart of not disbanding the police force, but redefining, I guess, the role of police and taking part of what they do now and putting it into the proper department or proper agency with people who are skilled, right?
There's a kind of schizophrenia in the de Blasio administration. So while they've poured tens of millions of dollars into expanded gang policing, possibly even more than tens of millions, they've at the same time put a few million into community-based anti-violence efforts like Cure Violence initiatives. And these initiatives really work. The evaluation research done by John Jay College showed dramatic reductions, like 50% reductions in shootings and homicides in the Cure Violence sites compared to areas that were just served by regular policing. And so the de Blasio administration needs to make a decision. Are they going to continue to rely on mass criminalization of young people of color, or are they going to really try to work this out at the community level by lifting these kids up, by solving problems so that it doesn't become this recurring nightmare?
But it's so all-encompassing. It's not only where you live, it's what school you go to. It's what kind of instruction you're getting. It's what kind of future you can look for, job training, jobs. I mean, this is such an old problem. As you said, I think it goes back to slavery and that whole concept of power over somebody and what you make them do. But we knew in the 70s and the 60s that you needed more money going into neighborhoods. You needed to build better housing, provide better health care. I mean, that report, the Kerner report said we're heading or we're in to two different societies in the United States, one white and one black. And now we've added Latinx, which is a major component, I think, nowadays. Is there a correlation between the stop and frisk and the increasing in the database? Do we know?
We don't think there's a connection there, but let me just go back to the Kerner Commission for a second, because you're right, the diagnosis was quite good in the Kerner Commission. The problem is that the programmatic outcome of that was more money for police. Police professionalization became what they actually spent money on. Mm-hmm. And this led to part of the problem that we're in today, which is police militarization, the dramatic expansion of policing, and What we hear from the de Blasio administration is more of that. In the wake of Eric Garner, in the wake of these gang takedowns, in the wake of the way the police responded to the protests this summer, we hear, well, we're going to give the police more money for more training, more technology to make them more professional, when what people in the community and out of the streets are saying is, actually, we'd like you to solve our neighborhood problems without police in every way we can possibly think of. And he just does not get that.
Is there federal money that comes into this?
Definitely. I mean, this has been true for decades. The 94 crime bill, flooded cities with money for hiring more police, and it flooded states with money for building prisons. And we're still living in the shadow of that. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, in Washington right now, both parties are stuck in that same mindset. Neither one of them is proposing reductions in federal spending to support local policing. They're not talking about ending, these military transfers. So it's really up to us at the local level, I think, to try to solve this problem.
But it's a major part of Black Lives Matter and all of the consciousness of the racism that we have. It's a basic problem. That's what gets to be so discouraging.
Well, I think what's exciting about the moment we're in right now is that people see the lack of value of a lot of these kinds of professionalization reforms, that implicit bias training is not going to get us out of this mess, that police community meetings are not going to solve this, that what we want is to begin to really address the fundamental problems of racial inequality in the United States. And that means investing in communities, not in police.
Exactly, right. Are some of the people who've been arrested and incarcerated because of this, then they're on parole or probation? Are they caught into that cycle of recidivism?
It's a real challenge, yes. Now, most of these people, though, remain imprisoned because they've all had to face very serious charges and as we heard, the pressure to plead guilty is so great because the RICO law allows the prosecutor to convict someone with no direct evidence that they did anything. So it's just about these associations. So unfortunately, most of these young people are still incarcerated. A few have gotten out, and then they face the burden of a felony record and continuation of parole, often for long periods.
And they can't go home if the family lives in a public housing project, they can't go home to join the family, or the family gets evicted if they want to live with him. That is the pinnacle of the ridiculousness of this project. What we worry about is what happens to people who come out of prison. And here we're denying it and forcing them right back on the streets.
Well, you're guaranteeing that they won't have access to the formal economy, which just makes the likelihood of their involvement in black market activities just skyrocket. And then we say, well, they were a failure because they got arrested again on a drug charge or whatever, when really we have failed them by giving them these black marks on their record and making it impossible for them to get a regular job.
There's a film that's, what is that about Keith, what's his last name? Khalif
Browder. Khalif Browder, yeah. Is that who you're thinking of?
Yeah.
Yeah, the documentary Time, the Khalif Browder story that's available on Netflix, I believe.
Yeah, and also, if you really want to, I wish you would all go to the site of the project at Brooklyn College and read the report, because we have to, I mean, the only way we're going to change this is from public outright indignation and action. And we have an election coming up next year, and this is one of the key things. So I just can't imagine that in this day and age, we're allowing this to happen. Does a RICO charge doesn't put you into federal prison?
Oh, if it's prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office, you go to federal prison, and then the state of New York has its own conspiracy cases, and those defendants end up in state prison. And here in New York City, we've done both.
Yeah. And Darlene, where is your son?
Federal.
Right. So it doesn't, you're not facing a trip way up north or anything to visit him, which at least is a help.
Well, they haven't given
Oh,
him
no visits.
to his permanent location right now, because with the COVID, they had put a hold on transferring all prisoners at this time. So everybody's been kind of on a standstill. But they're supposed to put them within 500 miles of their where their home is, which is still a long distance to travel.
Yeah.
He could be in Virginia, for instance.
Yeah, it's really terrible. I want to thank both of you. Alex, in a way, this Zooming has made your life much easier and enabled you to spread your message, right? You could
Before COVID, I was on a plane every other week for 3 years.
Can't imagine.
And so, yes, now I can do several events a week.
A day. When do you have time
And
to?
sometimes multiple ones a day, yes.
And Darlene, let's see, just briefly in a minute, less than a minute because we don't have more time. Is it enabling for you, or is it inspiring for you to work on the project?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, to address and to speak out about it, you know, to tell people the real facts of what's going on, and you know how people can easily get so caught up on something just by mere association, just by the mere retaliation from the NYPD. They're out to get someone, how they can work together to conspire, and we have that in my son's case, where one of the police officers who came to testify at trial, and he really perjured himself by talking and falsifying information. But it's, you know, they get away with this because they work together in collaboration with that. So it's very important that I'm involved and to educate people how easy, just like you and I also here, we can be considered a part of a clique, a crew, you know, a gang, easily just by the mere association.
Right. It could happen. It's like the expression, I mean, every time I walked into a prison, a women's prison, I would think to myself, there, but the grace of God goes I. It's such a fine line, and it's such a complicated system. Well, I hope you will come back again. And I admire all the work that you guys are doing. And I hope that the people, that anybody who's viewing this will really look at the website. You want to tell me again, Alex, the website?
PolicingandSocialJustice.org.
And be sure to follow it and work and read the report. And then they have other reports that are also just as enlightening. So again, thank you very much. And I'm all with you. I don't know what else I can do, but I hope I can do something. Thank you.
Thanks, Ronnie. We appreciate it.